have you ever had to learn something new? Perhaps it was some new knowledge or a new skill. How did you learn? Did you have a teacher? Did you have a lot of questions? Did you doubt yourself? What did you learn about yourself? So I think we all have had to learn some new knowledge or new skill, whether it be in school, school starting up this week, whether it be at our job, at work, or maybe we just had an interest in something, so we took up something new to learn. Often, when we learned something new, we had a teacher to help guide us along to learn that new thing. Some of which we learned by direct instruction from them, from our teacher, and we also would imitate them as we took that skill and that knowledge and integrated it. So hello, my name is Kenny, and I am the newest priest here, and if I haven't met you yet, hello, and if I have, good to see you again. In the past couple of years, I had the opportunity to do a lot of learning about myself and caring for others in the context of hospital chaplaincy. I did this learning through a training program called Clinical Pastoral Education. I did this at both UK Healthcare and at the Lexington Veterans Affairs healthcare system. So let me take you to my very first clinical hours when I was a resident at UK, my very first clinical hours, which was a 12-hour shift at Chandler Hospital. So imagine that. And it was overnight as well. So I was doing this shift as the solo chaplain on call in the hospital. And it turned out to be an eventful night, and sadly, a night of a lot of loss. So early in the night, I responded to a code blue, which is a cardiac arrest. And I was present with the spouse and daughter of the patient who would not survive. I sat on the floor with them, bearing witness to the acute grief at this sudden loss, and was present with them in the room as they said their goodbyes. Later on in the shift, a young woman came into the emergency department as a trauma alert and needed emergency surgery from the injury sustained during a car wreck. I was present during that trauma alert, as all the on-call chaplains are required to be. And as I watched the trauma team do their work and make their assessment, and as I watched that, I got the sense that this was very serious. The patient was in very bad shape and taken quickly to surgery. Later on, I received word via page that this patient did not survive surgery, and I was requested to be present with the surgeons as they informed the family. So I got myself to the surgery area there and waited anxiously outside of the consult room door for the surgeons to make their appearance, which doctors always run on their own time, as I'm sure we all have experienced. And finally they come, and I enter the consult room with them feeling anxious about this terrible news the family was about to receive. Once the family was informed, there was acute grief at the suddenness of this loss. Many tears and wails were had in that consult room. Again, I bore witness to this loss. Spent some more time on the floor with them. So this was about halfway through that 12-hour shift, and a little bit later on in the early morning hours, to finish that night, there was another trauma alert for a car wreck, which had multiple people in for injuries and a fatality at the scene. Again, I was called to be present for the trauma alert as it was paged out. And then I was present again for when the family was informed of the fatality by the coroner. Feeling weary from all that I experienced prior in the shift, it was hard to imagine yet another difficult, hard conversation with family learning of an unexpected loss. This experience of grief for those present came out as anger. Anger at the news of the loss. Anger at the messenger. Again, another consult room, another hard conversation. And I was not expecting that anger to come forth. So in the morning, I gave report to the coming chaplain for the day shift, gave that person the report that they needed to know and what to follow up on. And I left the hospital reeling from all that I experienced in one shift. This was my very first on-call shift, first clinical hours as a new resident chaplain. And this is what I had. And I wondered to myself, what have I gotten myself into? I'm supposed to be here for a year, and this was the very first shift. I'm in for an experience. So I learned a lot that night. I learned a lot during my residency at UK, and I learned a lot during my fellowship at the VA. For instance, I learned in those profound moments, words often fail, so it's best to be present. I also learned to rethink my own relationship with anger, one that's solely a negative emotion, to one that has many different facets to it, of which can also be a positive thing. I learned many different stories of people's lives that were often unexpected and held those with them for the time I was there. This was a different way of being that I did not have before my training programs, all of which was done under the guidance of a teacher. And at times, the teacher gave specific practices to aid in my work of being with people in these moments. And so to learn these practices, I would imitate these practices, to care for others until it became part of my own practice, part of my own being, my own way of showing up. And over the course of this training, I invited God to have my heart transformed into this way of being. Our Ephesians reading today picks up the thread of what it means to follow Christ in the community of the church. The community at Ephesus was learning a new way of being and living together as this community that follows Christ. They are taking off the old and putting on the new. We read and hear several instructions of how to live in community with one another. And as members of this community, these are the ways we are to live and relate to one another. Ephesians states, we are to be imitators of God as we live together. So what does it mean to imitate God? How does one do that? It means to reflect the character of God in our own lives. God's character is marked by holiness, love, mercy, and compassion. To imitate God is to strive to embody these attributes in our daily lives. It means choosing to live in a way that honors God and reflects God's love to those around us. So as we try to be imitators of God, it's important to recognize this is not about trying to be God or trying to attain God's perfection. Rather, it's about allowing God's Spirit to work within us, transforming us and our hearts into the likeness of Christ. The more we open ourselves to God's Spirit, the more our hearts will be transformed into the way of God's love. When we invite God's Spirit of love to change us, the Spirit will then change the way we live our lives and live in community with others. It'll become a new way of being. So Ephesians then leaves us with the concept of imitation to practical application. The call to imitate God finds its most tangible expression in how we live our lives, how we walk in love. So walking in love, it means to make that love our guide in our lives. It's not enough simply to feel love or having loving intentions, although that is important. but it's deeper than that. Called to actually live out our love in words, actions, and relationships. This is the love exemplified by God. So every act of compassion, every word of encouragement, every decision to forgive, these are all ways we can walk in love with one another. New ways of being together in community, being imitators of God. So how may God transform you to live in a new way of being and to be a source of God's love in our community? How might you invite the Spirit to help guide you in that work? So my prayer for you all is that you may find that guidance as we live together in community. Amen.